Chapter 3.
She keeps doing that.
Is she allowed to do that?
She can't be older than 8, right? Maybe 9?
Ayase flicked her wrist. The metal lid of the lighter in her hand snapped shut with a click. She pushed the lid back with her thumb, ground the wheel down, and watched the flame jump to life once more.
I'm getting a none.
Are you sure? We don't have long here.
I don't think that girl's allowed to have...
Ayase's eyeballs rolled up. Sister Kumiko, her arms crossed over her simple habit, glared down at Ayase with dark, disappointed eyes. Ayase snapped the lighter shut.
I can't believe you!
Kumiko hissed as she snatched the lighter with one hand and Ayase's arm with the other. The woman dragged Ayase from her sitting position into a corner obscured from view. Ayase knew the couple had still seen her. A man and a woman, probably in their late 20s, who probably couldn't make a baby. Ayase saw their embarrassed glances before Kumiko's body blocked her view of the room.
How many times do we have to have this discussion?
Kumiko pointed the lighter at Ayase, now a disciplinary tool.
Your little stunts aren't appreciated. Are you here to chase all potential parents out our humble door?
Ayase stared into those dark eyes. She wasn't intimidated. Kumiko sighed angrily and began her speech about being cooperative. So what if Ayase didn't want to leave? The group home had corners and closets and trees. It had places to run to when things fell apart. Ayase knew she wasn't like other girls. Other girls didn't feel their bodies breaking up every time they got upset. She didn't need some new adults watching her every move. She didn't need smaller grounds, she didn't need more attention, and she didn't need to hear the cooperation speech again. Every time Kumiko snapped about how normal children needed to act, Ayase got a little more frustrated at everyone's assumption that she was normal. Her eyes grew hard. She snatched the lighter from Kumiko's outstretched hand. Kumiko shrieked. As the lighter was once again confiscated and Ayase's arm fell to the nun's grip, the girl noticed the young couple. They stared at her, confusion and pity written across their boring faces. But Ayase still won. As Kumiko dragged her out of the visiting room, that boring couple simply turned their heads away. Ayase couldn't think straight. Her heart thundering in her ears, she ran to the hallway window with Joe and Sachi behind her. She slammed her hands against the windowsill, her eyes frantically scanning the school gate below. There was a motorcycle parked there. No man, just a motorcycle. Ayase stared at the bike as white panic washed her mind.
Oh no.
Sachi's spikes pressed against the glass.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Joe!
Joe whipped his head to Sachi.
What?
He snapped.
You think this is my fault, asshole?
Sachi pulled back from the window.
But it's that guy!
He cried.
The one from the club! We've got to call the cops!
We don't know it's him, Sachi.
But...
Shut up!
Joe glared daggers at Sachi. He seemed more angry than scared, but the bare shake to his shoulders implied otherwise.
A bike and some gossip don't mean anything. We're not calling the cops until we know what's going on.
But...
Think about it.
Joe quickly ran a hand through his hair.
What if it's not actually him and we drag them out for a false alarm? If the police think we're too jumpy, they won't rush to help us if we really need it.
Sachi's hands bunched into fists.
What is it with you and cops? They told us we could call them for anything.
Don't start with me.
Joe's eyes flared up.
We wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't jumped the guy, dickhead.
Silence. Ayase was still pretty out of it. She only caught them out of the corners of her eyes and ears, really, so she only vaguely noticed the school bell ring. She pried her fingers from the windowsill with great difficulty a minute later. She had to go to class. Sachi was telling her she had to go to class. Ayase couldn't pay attention for 30 seconds that afternoon. She stared at the board, she stared at her pencil, but every single lecture went straight over her head. Joe had said they needed to wait. He wanted them to stay on school grounds, maybe send somebody to check with the office if the bike was still there after school. Sachi had reluctantly agreed while trying to reassure Ayase that everything would be all right. But Ayase was beyond reassurance. "He's after you," her brain echoed as it blocked out her teachers. "He's after you," it taunted as she checked the window between classes. The motorcycle never moved, and it remained without an owner, but Ayase still felt doom close around her heart. Why had she gone to that stupid club? Because Sachi had asked? She'd decided long ago that letting down classmates was necessary in her life. She had to keep some distance, or she put herself in danger. Look what being polite got you, she thought as she stared blankly at her desk. Now some sort of felon was after her, and he probably knew her secret. Her attacker had caught her in a vulnerable moment at the club. She remembered releasing a single insect when the thug knocked her out. Clearly he had noticed it. It explained that nagging feeling she'd had for days that someone was following her. The headaches, the panic, the fact that she'd had a horrifically vivid dream the night before where she was locked up and he was peering down at her through a magnifying glass. Her subconscious was trying to warn her. That man had learned her secret and he was going to chase her down. Why else would he come to her school? She and her friends probably weren't worth revenge, and it wasn't like Joe or Sachi had any sort of weird ability. The thug wouldn't have gone to the authorities or the media with his story since he'd been assaulting teenagers to protect a drug deal. No, he couldn't drag her to the government for dissection, or worse, until he had her in his physical grip again. Ayase's palms began to sweat. He was coming for her directly so he could deal with her directly. By the time the next class ended, her brain was so packed with wildly terrible fantasies that she barely heard the bell ring. When she dumbly made for the hallway, she half believed the thug awaited her there with a machine gun and a camera crew. A throng of students crowded the hallway window. They chatted loudly amongst themselves, the ones in the back trying to peek through to the outside.
Did you see the guy?
Someone asked excitedly.
No, but I think that's his bike.
Ayase froze. She didn't see Sachi or Joe in the crowd. She whipped back to the classroom. It was empty, except for a girl asleep in the front row. Ayase pushed her way through the crowd. When her hands finally slapped against the glass, she looked down to the gate below. The motorcycle was still there, although a contraption she'd seen on illegally parked cars now locked its back tire. A man on a cell phone paced beside it.
Tsuyoshi said he ran right across the track during gym.
You could see him from the tennis courts?
Yoshi's full of shit.
Did you see the old lady? Daisuke said he saw an old lady, too.
Daisuke doesn't wear his glasses during gym.
He's still got contacts, moron.
Kiss my ass, and Daisuke is a liar.
Shut up, he's my boyfriend.
The speculations of the students turned into panicked mush in Ayase's brain. He was on school grounds, and he wasn't even hiding himself. She heard someone mention the word big, and it was accompanied with an uncanny description of the man from the club. He was here. He was in her school. As Ayase's sweating hands formed a foggy lubrication with the glass, she stared at the man below who paced by the bike. As he murmured something on his cell phone, he looked up at the window and met her terrified eyes. Ayase blinked. It was the cop. The one from the station, the one Sachi had stared at in the hallway. His eyes dragged back to the motorcycle as he continued his conversation.
Did you see the old lady?
Ayase numbly stepped back from the window, the students shifting and spilling to take her place in front. Detective Nakajima was a little old. She was old, and she knew about the man from the club. The motorcycle was locked with a government contraption. The cop outside was on a phone call with somebody. The police were there. Ayase turned and sprinted toward the nearest set of stairs.
Ayase!
She heard her name being called, but only in an abstract sense. She had to get to that cop. She had to tell him that the man in the club was after her and that she needed protection. She had to tell the cops he was crazy. Even if they caught him and he did reveal Ayase's secret, the cops wouldn't believe him, right? The man was a criminal. The police surely heard weirder stories from felons trying to slip away.
Ayase!
Ayase suddenly stopped running, her school slippers sliding her so close to the stair edge that she had to grip the railing. She stared down those stairs, her breath catching in her throat. Could she really risk everything she had on the police? They had said the thug was a particular problem for them, but they hadn't explained why. Everyone was always talking about how corrupt the cops were. Maybe the man had dirt on them they needed to keep quiet. And in a situation like that, wouldn't he barter another secret for his freedom? Something he could prove if only the police got their hands on the girl in question? They could be making a deal, Ayase thought frantically, and she'd be walking right into their trap. They could be plotting together for her, couldn't they? That cop was on a phone call with somebody.
Ayase!
Someone gripped Ayase's wrist. She instinctively jerked her arm free, spinning around as she did so. As if the world had slowed around her, she saw Sachi's wide eyes shift from worry into panic as a few strands of her hair swished up in front of her face. She also realized in equally slow motion that there was no stair beneath the foot she stepped back with.
Being nervous was a new feeling for Joe. Granted, he'd been in his fair share of sketchy situations in his life, but the short-lived panic of nearly getting your teeth broken by a robbed businessman was something Joe could live with. But a day or two of general discomfort followed by several hours of actual near worry? Hell no. Joe glided through his risky lifestyle with a practiced and comforting ease, and he wasn't about to let a series of asinine events rattle him. So when Seiya caught up to him in the bathroom again that day, and Joe stepped out to find a crowd by the window and Ayase tumbling down the stairs, he made a decision. Seiya? Joe turned from the scene of Sachi crying out and running after his pseudo-girlfriend. Joe reached out and gripped Seiya by both shoulders, an action that made Seiya blink. I'll join your stupid gang. Seiya's eyes lit up.
Yeah?
He asked excitedly, his unwashed hands closing over Joe's. Joe quickly broke the contact. Don't make a big deal out of it, he muttered. Just bring me to whoever's in charge. School's over in a period. I'll meet you in the lounge.
All right!
Seiya laughed, revealing his crooked teeth to the fluorescent school lights. Joe managed to maneuver himself out of the way of Seiya's inevitable backslap.
Yeah, in the lounge, after school.
Joe stomped back to class with his eyes locked forward. It'll solve my problems, he told himself as he went back to his seat. He fell back into his chair and grabbed his pen, ready to finish the last class of the day and move forward with his new plan. He noticed, with extreme distaste, that the pen shook in his fingers. He slammed the pen down on the desk and ran his hands through his hair. He had to calm down. He could hear the students around him chattering about some big guy and some old lady seen on school grounds, but Joe still wasn't convinced he was in immediate danger. No one could get him while he was in class. If the thug from the club had chased him down, Joe would probably be fine as long as he stayed in populated places. He had no idea why the thug was after him. Considering the man had ditched after the drug deal went sour, Joe had assumed that the thug didn't give a rat's ass about the whole thing. Joe wouldn't have believed the man was after him had he not heard the Kogal describe him. It went against all of Joe's common street sense. Which left him with one possible answer. The thug held a grudge. Grudges could be fleeting if acting on them proved to be too much trouble. Joe just needed to relax. That, more than anything, was why he was ready to join the stupid gang or No Girls Allowed club or whatever the hell it was Seiya was always bugging him about. Joe wasn't a team player, and to be honest, the thought of joining some clutch of loiterers was almost too embarrassing to stand. But he also knew that if he started hanging out with kids with reputations, it would offer him the crowds and possibly even the protection he needed to make the thug lose interest. Luckily, Sachi and Ayase didn't return to class that day. The teacher said they'd gone to the hospital so Ayase could get a few stitches. Joe went to the lounge after school without having to answer the annoying questions they would have been sure to ask. Seiya was waiting for him in the lounge, a pleased grin on his face.
Hey!
He called.
Ready to enter the big time, Joe?
Joe murmured a non-committal answer. Shut up, he thought. Seiya started rattling off names and rules, and something about a handshake as he led Joe off school grounds. Joe completely blocked him out. He wasn't in the mood, and he wanted to pay close attention to where they were going. It wasn't until they were on the subway that Joe suddenly realized Seiya had asked him a question. Huh? Joe finally looked Seiya in the face.
Weed.
Seiya gave one of his crooked smiles and mimicked holding a joint to his lips.
Do you burn?
Of course he's asking about pot, Joe thought darkly. What else does this kid care about? No, Joe answered, turning back to the window. Tobacco's expensive as it is. He neglected to add that he didn't like to look and act like an idiot. Seiya laughed.
I never took you for being straight edge,
he said.
Too bad, man. Byakko guys get their hands on good shit.
Byakko? Joe repeated. Seiya wilted slightly.
The gang? Ari told you that's our name.
Sorry, he said, turning back to Seiya. I didn't hear you. Byakko, like the tiger? Seiya nodded.
Byakko's the Chinese god of the west sky, and our turf's the west side of Tokyo, get it?
He smiled, clearly pleased. Joe refrained from saying that naming a gang after zodiac mythology was painfully lame. He sincerely hoped that whoever had thought that was a good idea had since left the organization. Joe cleared his throat. Okay, he said slowly. Does Byakko have any colors or anything? Seiya shrugged.
Not really, but one of the signs that you're in the gang is something white tied around your left wrist.
He held up his own wrist, which was adorned with a zip tie.
Like this.
Joe suddenly remembered one of the kids from his class wearing a white bandana around his wrist. Joe had always assumed it was some fleeting fashion trend, but apparently it was a gang thing. He mentally filed that bit of information away. Seiya eventually led Joe off the subway and into a district Joe was familiar with. Dingy pubs and hole-in-the-wall noodle shops lined the streets, broken up by the occasional convenience store or beauty parlor. Joe noticed a restaurant he'd gone to a few days before the beginning of school.
Over here, Joe.
Seiya was already halfway across the street before Joe noticed the crosswalk signal. Joe followed, refusing to match Seiya's jumpy pace, and watched Seiya disappear into a pub labeled Kiseki. The pub was little more than an open room with half a dozen tables strewn around. 2 tables were occupied with pairs of people eating, and a few drunks were already slumped over the bar at the front. Seiya stood at that bar and chatted with a well-dressed bartender. The bartender looked up, focused his eyes on Joe, and smiled.
Oh.
Seiya followed the bartender's eyes.
That's Joe, Kenta-san. He's with me.
Seiya beamed.
He's a new recruit I found.
The slight curl to Kenta's lips showed a sort of friendly amusement.
Oh, how nice,
he said politely.
Why don't you go ahead and bring him to Miki, Seiya-kun?
Seiya beckoned to Joe and disappeared into a back room. Joe gave a half bow to the bartender as he passed, and the bartender nodded in response. Seiya pushed aside a throw rug and pulled up a handled panel in the floor. He gestured for Joe to go down the revealed set of stairs first. When Seiya followed, he pulled the floor opening down behind him.
Kenta-san owns the bar,
Seiya explained.
He's here most of the time, and he'll let you in the back.
The basement to Kiseki was huge and renovated, with a large central room and a hallway leading off to one side. The main room had a number of locked crates and boxes pushed up against a wall, probably storage for the bar above, and 2 couches and several chairs crowded around a plasma TV. A pile of discarded jackets and snack wrappers lay beside the TV, atop the mess of wires that snaked from several game consoles. Seiya continued to the hallway. Joe passed a door that was closed, one that was cracked open to release the smell of tobacco and a few voices, and one with a large padlock on it. Seiya eventually opened up a door at the very end of the hall. A slight teenage boy sat in a beat-up recliner, his attention entirely focused on the PDA in his hands. He didn't seem to notice Seiya walk in.
Miki?
Seiya asked.
I brought him.
Miki didn't look up.
Brought who?
He asked flatly as he continued to tap at his tiny screen.
The guy who beat up Suzuki's crew. Remember? I said I told him about it.
Do you have Soshi's game on you?
Seiya paused.
Yeah,
he said at last, fumbling through his pockets before pulling out a plastic case filled with tiny video game cartridges.
Why?
He says you were supposed to give it back a month ago.
Miki pulled a key out of his pocket and tossed it in Seiya's general direction.
Drop it off in the game box so he'll stop bitching.
Seiya barely caught the key.
Don't you want to meet Joe?
Miki finally looked up, his dark eyes locking on Joe. He stared a moment, then moved his glance to Seiya.
I'll give him the rundown in private. Come back in 10 minutes.
Seiya seemed satisfied with the answer. He slapped Joe in the back, an action Joe was too slow to avoid, and left the room. Miki stood and slid the PDA into his jeans pocket. Joe was surprised to see that Miki was tiny, barely 160 centimeters tall, if he had to guess. He had hair to his shoulders, and the dark strands of it fell over his overly large t-shirt. His unfortunately tight jeans emphasized his boyish hips. With his slight build and large eyes, the unimpressed look on his face was the only thing that made him seem older than 12.
What was your name again?
He asked. Joe Oda.
And you kicked Suzuki's ass.
Joe shrugged.
You smell like nicotine.
Miki held out a hand.
Give me one?
Joe paused, then pulled the box out of his pocket. He passed a cigarette to Miki and followed it with his lighter. Joe lit up one for himself. Miki took a long drag, then let it out with a sigh. He visibly relaxed. He dragged again, focusing childishly big eyes on Joe once more.
I'm trying to quit,
he explained. Joe shrugged again. I don't know you or care, he thought. There was something creepy about the small boy in front of him. That, combined with Joe's general distaste for joining the gang in the first place, was making Joe almost as uneasy as he'd been at school. Miki hung his thumbs in the pockets of his skinny jeans.
Joe,
he murmured around his cigarette.
I'm gonna be straight with you, alright?
Joe waited.
This is a gang of complete dipshits. We've got maybe 5, 6 kids who can hold themselves in a fight, and 2 kids other than me who can pick locks worth a damn. Most members of Byakko loiter, smoke weed, or make general asses of themselves. If you're as badass as people are saying, you're probably gonna be disappointed.
Joe paused. At least he's being honest, he thought. Joe felt slightly better that he didn't have to try to look impressed. How many people do you have total? Joe asked.
About 300.
If fewer than 10 of them had actual thug merit, Joe wasn't sure he was in the right place. How's your street cred? Joe asked after a moment, wondering if he was asking the right question and slightly hating himself for saying the word street cred in a proper sentence.
Mine or the gang's?
The gang's. Miki rolled the cigarette between his lips.
Better than it should be. That's mostly because the old gang actually got shit done. Actually.
He let out a puff of smoke.
Let me start at the beginning. Have you ever heard of Seiryu?
Joe shook his head. I'm guessing that's another gang, he said sourly, remembering that Seiryu was the Chinese dragon god of the East.
Our old rival gang. Seiryu got off on vandalizing stuff. Graffiti, trashing motel rooms, taking down street signs, that kind of thing. They got paid pretty good money by insurance fraud lowlifes for it. We used to be big on stealing. Since it was hard to prove which gang was more badass in its respective field, we would just kick the shit out of whatever rival gang member wandered into our turf.
Joe's interest was slightly piqued. Byakko was the burglary gang?
Anyway, that's the way it was when I joined, when Takashi was in charge. About 2 years ago, the cops did a shakedown of Seiryu after they caused some big accident by taking out a streetlight. Half the kids went to juvie, and the other half were watched so carefully by the police that they couldn't do shit. The gang eventually fell apart, and all of a sudden we were the dominant gang by default. A few months after that, Takashi had to leave Tokyo because there was a warrant out for his arrest. His little brother Ban took over Byakko, even though Ban is completely useless. He lets pretty much anyone join the gang now.
Miki took a final drag, then dropped the cigarette to the stained, littered concrete floor and ground it with his shoe.
We're soft, disorganized, and half our members are potheads now. It's a disgrace to what we used to be.
Joe dropped his own cigarette to the floor. He thought a moment as he pushed the heel of his shoe against the still-smoking butt. You let anyone join the gang? He asked after a moment. Miki grimaced.
If you kicked even one ass, you're more qualified to join than most of the shitheads here.
I didn't really kick anyone's... Joe sighed. Look, he muttered. Everything at Blue Light with what's-his-face, the drug dealer?
Suzuki.
Whatever. I didn't go there looking for a fight, but shit happens, you know? And I don't like trouble. He idly fingered the cigarette back in his pocket. But I think it may have gotten me in trouble with someone there. Mickey furrowed his eyebrows.
Who?
He asked.
Suzuki's little pissant friends are locked up with him, and no one else on the street takes him seriously.
Joe hesitated. It was another guy, he said. A really big guy. A foreigner with sunglasses who was working as a bodyguard or something. The police definitely didn't pick him up.
A foreigner?
Mickey repeated. He rubbed the back of his neck.
That doesn't sound like... Hang on.
He raised an eyebrow.
A big foreigner wearing some kind of disguise?
Well, he had a baseball cap on, if you count a baseball cap and sunglasses as a disguise. Mickey whistled.
Wow.
He said.
So you met the Gaijin time bomb.
The Gaijin what? Joe definitely didn't like the sound of that. Mickey brushed off Joe's question.
You're fine,
He said matter-of-factly.
That guy's not after you.
Joe was starting to get annoyed. How are you so sure? He snapped.
Because that guy's on borrowed time.
Mickey dropped his thumbs back to his pockets.
Everyone knows the meanest, dirtiest drug lords in Tokyo want him dead as soon as possible.
Joe paused. Really? He asked after a moment. What for?
Hell if I know.
Mickey sighed.
The point is, he has way too much shit on his plate as it is. He's not after you, you're fine.
He dropped back into his recliner, looking as bored as the first moment he looked up from his PDA.
Anything else bothering you, Joe Oda?
Joe took a minute to digest that. He wasn't sure he could believe Mickey. He didn't know Mickey, and he definitely had no reason to trust Mickey. The Kogal in Joe's class had described the thug from the club so accurately. Joe thought a minute, his fingers twitching, before sliding another cigarette out of its pack. He asked somebody about me, he said at last, touching the flame of his lighter to the end of his cigarette. He snapped the lighter closed. What do you make of that? Mickey shrugged.
Honestly, it could have been anything. But I doubt he's stupid enough to track you down because he wanted to kick your ass. Attacking a minor always draws way too much attention. Hell, he may have been looking for you because he needed help. I heard he's reached out to some pretty bizarre people over the years.
He paused.
If he was working for Suzuki, he must be really desperate.
Joe grimaced. That guy wanted his help? He didn't buy it. No matter how much his stupid classmates thought otherwise, he had not come across as a badass in that club skirmish. Joe was pretty self-aware. He knew when he came across as particularly slick. The night in blue light was not one of those times. Still, if there was truth to what Mickey said about the thug being a wanted man, Joe's current plan for keeping that guy the hell away from him would still apply. Joe would avoid dark alleys and the like, since someone in hiding would definitely avoid stalking a teenage boy in a crowded place. And if the thug was running for his life, he would probably lose interest in Joe pretty quickly. Does this guy have connections? Joe asked. His plan wouldn't work if the man had sub-thugs. Mickey snorted.
Are you kidding? No one wants to get near that guy. Having the drug lords after your head makes you about as popular as a hooker with teeth in her box. No one wants to be the poor fucker the drug lords think is hiding him.
Joe finally felt himself relax a little. Maybe I am okay, he thought. The Byakko gang had numbers and a reputation at least. That would help him. And if the thug somehow did manage to track down Joe, all Joe had to do was stay in a crowded place and threaten to expose the guy. It was lame, but it would work. Joe took a long, relaxing drag. I'm okay, he repeated in his head.
Are you high, Oda?
Joe's thoughts were suddenly cut off by Mickey's voice. Joe left his reverie so abruptly that the cigarette dropped from his lips. Mickey pulled out his PDA again.
You can go,
he dismissed. Joe, miffed that anyone would mistake his deep thinking for being stoned, angrily ground his half-finished cigarette into the concrete floor. There has to be more about this gang you need to tell me, he snapped. Mickey glanced up.
Not really,
he answered.
You're in. Kenta will let you back here if he's working, and don't tell anyone about our location. If you need anything, talk to me. I don't like giving Bon any responsibility if I can help it.
I thought you said Bon's in charge.
I also said he's useless.
Mickey began tapping on his PDA again.
I'm technically second or third in command or whatever, but rank doesn't really mean anything these days. If you need something, you come to me.
The comment on Byakko's old talent for stealing, and Mickey's own admission to being good at picking locks, still interested Joe. A little. What do you mean, if I need something? Mickey sighed and dropped the PDA to his lap.
You go to Fukuhashi, right?
Yeah?
So do I. I'm a second year.
Mickey pointed at Joe with his digital pen.
If you need pot, go to Seiya or one of the other ship for brains. If you want something useful, like information, come to me in the 5th period cafeteria.
He dropped his attention back to his PDA.
I know everyone.
Mickey's comment about being a second year confirmed Joe's suspicions that Mickey wasn't as young as he looked. The analogy with the hooker was a bit sophisticated for a middle schooler. That's all I wanted to know, Joe mumbled. I guess I'll see you around. Joe turned for the door, hoping to make a swift exit from the little clubhouse and away from the creepy boy child.
Wait.
Joe sighed. What? Mickey pushed himself out of his recliner and held a hand out at Joe.
I have to show you something. If you're in Bacco now.
He muttered.
Hold out your hand.
What?
Just hold out your hand, asshole.
Miki's eyes flared with some severe emotion Joe couldn't place. Joe slowly walked back to Miki, then reached for his hand, which he assumed was out for a handshake. Miki pulled back.
I told you to hold out your hand, not grab mine.
Joe had just about had it with Miki's attitude. He held out his hand rigidly in a mimic of Miki's and tried very hard to not jam it in Miki's solar plexus. Miki slowly slapped the back of his hand against the back of Joe's twice.
Now make a fist,
he muttered. Something Seiya had ranted about suddenly came back to Joe. Wait a minute, he said carefully. Is this a secret handshake?
Just make a fist!
Miki roared, his body trembling. The stupidity of the whole thing was overwhelming. Miki's poorly disguised anger told Joe that the handshake was yet another aspect of the gang Miki didn't approve of. I'm guessing this is another new policy, Joe said after a moment.
Yes, but now you're making me talk about it, and for that I hate you. Just make a goddamn fist.
Joe slowly complied, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into.
Paging Dr. Wakamiya. Dr. Wakamiya, you're needed in post-op.
Ayase stared at the ceiling of the ER, the chattering of the people and the ringing of phones turning to inoffensive white noise in her ears. Her hands, resting on the armrests of her chair, shook slightly. She curled those hands into fists and closed her eyes. She was an idiot. Of all the times to freak out, of all the times to go falling down a flight of stairs, her overactive imagination had chosen to send her over the edge when being calm and reasonable was more important than anything. Her freakout had not only put her at risk, but it might have even put Sachi and the school nurse, who sat in a nearby chair and read a magazine, at risk as well. Ayase considered it a miracle that they'd left the school without being tailed. She'd stared out the back of the cab the entire way to make sure.
Ayase?
Ayase opened her eyes and glanced at Sachi. He flipped his cell phone shut and let out a breath.
At least we got through to Kiyoshi. Joe's a tough guy. I'm sure he'll be fine.
Ayase couldn't stand his sympathetic gaze. Mortified, she looked away.
Hey.
His hand gently rested on top of hers.
It's okay.
Her instinct was to pull away, but after he'd used his jacket to stop her bleeding, she knew how unfair it would be to reject his kindness. It frayed her already frayed nerves a bit more, but she didn't move from his touch. Sachi gave her a small smile.
Really?
He said softly.
It's okay. I was flipping out too. I swear I'm gonna have complete faith in the police from now on.
That makes one of us, she thought. Before the nurse had taken Ayase and Sachi to the hospital, the principal had made an announcement that the trespasser was a hoax. Detective Nakajima had called Sachi personally right after that, saying that she had apprehended the thug from the club on school grounds, but that they needed to keep that bit of information to themselves. Nakajima had assured Sachi that he and his friends no longer had anything to worry about. But Ayase didn't believe it. Keeping the capture of a criminal under wraps struck her as suspicious. Ayase still considered the woman a potential threat. Ayase hadn't abandoned her theory of the thug and the cops being in cahoots, or that, regardless of whether or not he had an in with the police, the thug had told them about her being able to turn into insects. She still thought the lot of them could be plotting her capture at that very moment. Her brain had spun the possibilities around until she felt sick. Now she just sat, emotionally exhausted, personally disgusted, and resigned to her fate, whatever that ended up being. There was nothing she could do now. She needed stitches in her arm, and the school nurse and Sachi wouldn't leave her alone until that happened. "Excuse me," she murmured, pulling from Sachi's hand. She lurched to her feet.
Do you need something?
Ayase sighed. "Bathroom," she muttered. "I'll be right back."
"Don't forget where we're sitting,"
the school nurse commented without looking up from her magazine.
"And don't get your bandage wet."
Ayase plodded off, her eyes locked on the floor. She eventually reached the bathroom. She pushed open the door, noticed the urinals, then let the door swing back into place. She checked the sign on the wall. The bathroom was co-ed. Fine, she thought, as she pushed open the door again. At least I'm not so out of it I walked into the men's room. It would be a small humiliation compared to what she'd done that day, but she simply didn't need anything else to make her feel like a useless, reckless idiot. The one thing that saved her self-esteem was that she'd been coherent enough to keep her body from turning into insects when she'd tumbled down the stairs. Although that had been why she'd been too distracted to fall properly. Her fingers went to the bandaged gash on her arm, but she vaguely remembered she wasn't supposed to play with it either. She sighed and dropped her hand back to her side. As usual, she made for the stall farthest from the door. She'd gone 2 steps toward it when she suddenly noticed something. Someone was choking. Maybe. Or was that the sound of vomiting? There was someone in a stall making disturbing gagging noises, and it made her pause. The voice stopped gagging and instead just panted. A few moments of that, and the stranger started sobbing. Ayase, for the first time that afternoon, forgot how her life was about to end. Her eyebrows furrowed. If someone was vomiting, should she tell someone? They were in a hospital. And yet, now all she heard was that fitful, shaky crying. Did that warrant calling someone? The voice sounded male. Would a boy be embarrassed if a girl reported... Her exhausted brain eventually gave up. She took a long breath and closed her eyes. Breathe, Ayase. She opened her eyes again. Desperate for some sort of distraction, she glanced through the crack in the stall. The boy had left it unlocked, so it was easy to attain a sliver of visibility. A teenager of about her age was on hands and knees in front of the toilet, one hand shakily gripping the porcelain edge. She noticed in surprise that he wore the uniform of her school. "Are you okay?" she asked. She didn't realize she'd spoken the question until her voice echoed against the bathroom walls. The boy's head whipped to her. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, and his mussed hair dropped scraggly bangs onto his pale forehead. Completely unexpectedly, Ayase recognized the boy. He was from her homeroom. He sat in the back. She barely recognized him because he was usually asleep in class or staring blankly at a wall. The boy suddenly threw himself at her. He was on his knees, so he was only high enough to grip the bottom of her blouse with both fists. He stared up at her, tears running down his cheeks, and crazily met her dumbfounded eyes.
"Help me!"
Ayase was frozen in place. She had no idea how to process what knelt before her. The classmate gripped her blouse so tightly that it was raised from her waist, and she could feel his hot breath on her navel.
Paging Dr. Wakamiya. Dr. Wakamiya, you're needed in post-op.
The board announcement over the speaker seemed to snap the boy out of his panic. He suddenly released her like he'd been burned, his lips open and trembling.
"No,"
he blurted.
"I can't. No, forget what I said."
Ayase just stared. The boy struggled to his feet, then grabbed her elbow and stumbled out of the stall. Ayase nearly fell as he jerked her out. He shoved her into the stall furthest from the door.
"Stand on the toilet,"
he ordered.
"Don't make a sound. He can't know you're here."
"Who's he?" she breathed. The boy suddenly released his death grip on her elbow and grabbed her by both shoulders. His hands shook as his reddened eyes bore into hers.
"Don't tell anybody I was here."
His fingers buried into her shoulders hard enough to start bruises.
"Please."
Ayase nodded slowly, which seemed to be the only thing that would get the boy to let go. He pushed her back toward the toilet.
"Hide! Hurry!"
Like a confused but obedient child, Ayase stepped onto the toilet. The boy ran out of the stall and closed the door behind him, sure to leave it open a crack to prove it wasn't locked. He'd barely released the handle when the door to the bathroom squeaked on its hinges.
"Kado-kun,"
called a male voice. Balanced precariously on the toilet, her hands pressed against opposite sides of the stall walls, Ayase suddenly remembered the frantic boy's name from roll call. Kadayuki Yoshimoto. The new man walked slowly across the bathroom, his shoes squeaking on the tile floor. Kadayuki went silent as death. The few moments that stranger walked across the bathroom felt like they would never end. He finally stopped with almost deliberate slowness in front of the stall next to Ayase's.
"Were you talking to someone in here?"
Ayase stopped breathing. She could hear Kadayuki's panting in the silence that followed, but neither he nor the man said anything else. Her heart pounded in her ears. Ayase swallowed hard.
"No,"
Kadayuki said at last in a near whisper. His voice wasn't as desperate as it had been, but she could still hear it quake.
"The doctor wants to see you, Kado-kun."
She heard the faint rustling of clothing like the man was reaching out. Ayase's eyes focused on the man's shoes. They were leather and looked expensive, but she recognized the cuff of the pants that fell over them. Whoever had walked in was also wearing the boy's uniform of Fukuhashi. And she thought she recognized that voice. Was that the guy from the roof? The guy with the gloves?
"It's okay."
The voice reassured smoothly.
"Don't be afraid."
More rustling of clothing, and then Kadayuki's feet stumbled to a walk. The other student followed, but only after Kadayuki passed by. The two of them exited the bathroom. The sound of the door swinging shut behind them came a moment later, lending a close to the moment that was eerily final. Ayase didn't move. She could feel the cold sweat on her temples and hear the deafening sound of blood rushing in her ears. She stood on that toilet for what felt like an eternity. She didn't know how much time actually passed, but definitely long enough for her to hear several more announcements over the loudspeaker. I have to go, she thought. Sachi's waiting for me. Carefully, she lowered one foot to the floor. When she pulled one hand from its position against the wall, she noticed that her hands were trembling uncontrollably. Ayase swallowed hard.
Help me!
She closed her eyes. She swallowed again, this time pushing back bile. She bunched a fist in front of her mouth and tried not to be sick.
Watanabe-san!
Ayase had no idea what to do. Not in that bathroom, not back at school, and not in the club. She was completely lost in all aspects of her life, and just a few days ago she'd been worried about getting through high school without drawing attention to herself. Someone had asked for her help. Someone else had asked her for help. Ayase couldn't help him. After everything that happened, she was so lost and so terrified that she couldn't handle anyone's problems but her own. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't even sure she could do that.
Joe was feeling better. A lot of the tension melted from his shoulders the minute he left Kiseki and its underground gang hideout. The subway ride home was almost pleasant. He got off a stop early so he could walk the rest of the way to the school. He could waltz down a busy street in the late afternoon, right? The crazy big guy wouldn't chase him down, not if he was hiding out from drug lords or whatever. And now Joe had a gang, albeit a lame one, to provide him with some protection. Joe actually smiled to himself about that. That reminds me, he thought. I need something white. It was one of the few gems from Seiya's mouth that Joe remembered. Since the entire reason Joe had joined Byakko was for word-of-mouth protection, his membership was useless if no one could tell he joined. Joe stopped by a men's store a few blocks away. He wanted something noticeable, but he wouldn't be caught dead with anything that made him look like he was in an 80s gang movie. After a bit of deliberation, he bought himself a watch with a white leather wristband. He strapped it on his left wrist, satisfied that it would match even his nicer clothes. Joe spent the rest of the evening playing video games in the school lounge. When he went to bed, his regained confidence and hard-won relaxation helped him drift off into a comfortable sleep. It wasn't until he woke up past 10 a.m. that he realized how exhausted he'd been. Shit, he thought groggily. He slapped his bedside table, trying to blink away the blurriness in his eyes. So much for school. His hand finally fell on his box of cigarettes. He clutched it and dragged it to his lap. A piece of paper fluttered from the desk and onto his sheets. He frowned. He lit up a cigarette as he unfolded the small note. Joe, it read. We were looking for you yesterday. You were asleep when I got in. Sachi wants to talk to you. Are you coming to school today? I can't wake you up. The kanji for Kiyoshi's name was scrawled across the bottom. Joe took a long drag on his cigarette, crumpled up the note, and tossed it back onto his bedside table. At times like these, Joe was glad he didn't have a cell phone. He tried to reimagine the day before, having his guarded conversation with the gang leader while a cell phone went off in his pocket every 30 seconds. The mental image actually made him shudder. He glanced at his clock again and calculated a normal school day. Fourth period would be starting soon. Since he'd barely had dinner the night before, his stomach was already growling. He'd grab an early lunch. Maybe he would even make his afternoon classes. After a blissfully quiet shower in the empty communal bath, Joe got dressed and headed for the cafeteria. He made it right before the bell, which meant he got first dibs on the food before his savage classmates attacked. He took advantage and bought 2 of the best stuffed breads their cafeteria seemed to offer.
No!
Someone shouted from behind him.
Not the curry bread!
Joe contentedly unwrapped the plastic to the sounds of fighting behind him. The cafeteria had a dingy courtyard with a few benches. There was a hidden-away corner of the courtyard that was usually crammed with students trying to squeeze in a hidden smoke, but at this hour there was only one strung-out-looking classmate there, so Joe claimed his spot. He ate his first bread and lit up directly after. He was watching a growing crowd in the cafeteria and debating whether or not to pick pockets in it when the classmate beside him whistled. Joe glanced up, then immediately forgot what he was doing. The babe from the first day of school was standing over him at the bench, a small smile sending light glancing off her lip gloss. She glanced at the other student and made a kissy face.
Ken-chan?
She cooed.
Can you get me a tea? The line's really long at the machine, and I'm tired of getting groped.
The grungy classmate smiled and ground out his cigarette.
With or without sugar, baby?
No sugar today, sorry.
She flipped him a 500 yen coin.
But keep the change.
The classmate looked a little disappointed. He took her coin and departed. She's trying to get me alone. Joe's excellent mood improved even further. He shifted down the bench so she had room to sit down.
Can I trouble you?
She asked. Joe held out his box of cigarettes. You smoke?
Sometimes.
She leaned into the light he offered her. She took a long drag, released. She smiled at him.
It helps me keep my figure.
Joe couldn't help but enjoy the number of school-endorsed moral choices this girl had spurned in 30 seconds. What could he say? It was a turn-on. She took another drag and leaned back against the bench. Joe noticed her glitzy nails. Nice manicure, he commented. She held out a hand so he could get a better look. It was the perfect excuse to touch her. He gently pulled her hand closer. To Joe's surprise, that lovely palm was rough with calluses. "Where did you get these done?" he asked as he tilted her fingers. Her false nails were painted with a golden glitter and adorned with tiny suns.
A salon nearby, actually. It's owned by an old friend.
He looked up. Their eyes met. For several long seconds, he simply stared into those dark pools, trying to read her intentions. She was hiding something, he figured, but something much more obvious was floating on the surface. She wanted him. Or she wanted to try him anyway. He released her hand. "I guess my reputation precedes me," he said carefully. "Please tell me you didn't hear the blue light story."
Everyone heard that story, Oda-kun.
She puffed on her cigarette.
But we bumped into each other on the first day of school. Remember?
Of course he remembered. "You still haven't told me your name," he said.
Mitsuko Hoshino.
She flicked her cigarette away.
But you can call me Mitsuko-senpai.
"Are you a second year?"
A third year, actually.
Crap. Please be under 18, Joe prayed. He could tease out that information later. He didn't want to make his 15-year-old intentions that obvious. He decided to go back to the original thread of conversation. "Actually, I am looking for a new stylist. I'm not keen on taking a 40-minute bus ride to my old one." He took a long drag. "But I haven't found any place nearby that respects a straight man's desire for style." She leaned against the bench. She expertly crossed her legs in her short skirt and raised an eyebrow.
I can tell you care about your appearance,
she murmured.
You really stand out against the scruffy thugs at this school.
"I'm going to take that as a compliment." She licked her teeth.
Nice watch,
she said with careful emphasis. Joe had nearly forgotten the white watch. He pulled his left wrist closer and opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, Mitsuko suddenly leaned across him. Joe froze for a second. Her breasts brushed his arm.
Hey!
She called, waving a hand at a girl in the cafeteria.
Over here! Chitose, did you get my message?
Joe didn't want to come off as rude. He watched Chitose call something back and pointedly avoided his gaze from the older woman draped across his lap. "So, Mitsuko-senpai," he offered. "Do you like clubbing?" Mitsuko smoothly pushed herself back to a sitting position on the bench.
What was that?
She asked. "We were talking about blue light." Joe dropped his cigarette and ground it into the pavement. "Have you been to that place? Do you like it?" Mitsuko chuckled.
Blue light's a little lame,
she admitted.
But I do like clubs. I love the anonymity of them.
Joe's lips curled slightly. "Funny, I feel the same." She brushed a strand of bleached hair behind her ear.
Maybe we should go be anonymous together sometime.
Joe felt familiar satisfaction roll through his veins and relax every muscle in his body. Nothing loosened him up better than victory. "I'm in." Mitsuko stood and stretched her arms over her head.
I need that tea.
She yawned.
I hope Ken-chan wasn't killed in line. I should probably check.
Joe didn't want, or need, to ask for a number yet. "Do you usually have lunch 4th period?" he asked instead.
Usually.
"Good. I hate my 4th period class and want an excuse to skip it." She laughed. She waved a few of her glittering fingertips at him and sauntered away. Joe watched her go. The way she moved her hips, it had to be on purpose. No one moved like that in school slippers. But Joe liked thinking that it was on purpose. He preferred girls who played the game to those who were just themselves. He prided himself on his carefully constructed persona, after all. He valued effort over honesty in all things. It got a lot more shit done. A few students had grabbed seats in the small corner during his conversation with Mitsuko, so Joe decided it was getting too cramped. He unwrapped his second bread as he left the cafeteria and made his way back to the dorm. By the time he got back, he'd finished his bread and really needed something to drink. He found several empty tea and water bottles near his bed, but nothing with liquid left. Joe decided to forget his afternoon classes and go to a coffee shop instead. He reached into his pocket to make sure he had enough cash on him. His wallet was gone. Joe froze. His eyes quickly scanned his bedside table, but he knew he'd brought it to lunch. He pulled it out to buy his bread. He checked every pocket, cursing himself for letting all the blue light and Byakko nonsense distract him. Somebody was robbing him. How could he forget that? He'd spent the last day specifically seeking crowded places and hadn't thought for a second that it would make his wallet a target. He angrily pushed a cigarette between his lips and mentally called himself the filthiest insults he could come up with. At least he'd had the common sense to empty his wallet of anything important since school started. Something sharp pricked the edge of his frantic fingers. He dug his hand deeper into his pocket to fish out the offending item. It was a small piece of plastic painted in gold glitter. Joe could make out half a sun. The unlit cigarette fell from his mouth.
Hey, over here.
He suddenly felt Mitsuko's body drape over him again, the brush of her breasts completely dominating his attention. "Son of a bitch," he breathed. She'd bumped into him on the first day of school, right before he'd lost a wallet. She'd admitted to being a blue light. He'd found his stalker with the itchy fingers. For a long moment, Joe didn't know what to do, or think, or feel. All the blood in his body had already drained downward. Joe was simultaneously more furious and more turned on than he'd ever been in his life.